Thank you all for coming. I want to especially thank Howard and Margaret. I know what it's like to put together a series, so I know what it takes, so thank you so much. Also, thanks to my posse out there. You are the best. Thanks to my family. Yay, posse. You always support and show up. Speaking of gratitude, I'm going to give you 2 quotes and a poem for you, from my creative people out there. This is for you. The only unique contribution we will make in this world will be born of creativity. That's Brené Brown. Failure, which you will see a little of in my piece. Failure has a function. It asks if you really want to go on making things. It's a test. Right, Tim? Oh, you know, you're just one, oh my God, so I figured you must know something about that. And also the poem is by David White, an excerpt from Sweet Darkness in his book, The House of Belonging. Sweet Darkness. You must learn one thing the world was made to be free in. Give up all the other worlds except the one to which you belong. Sometimes it takes dark. Hi, Royal. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn. Anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. Excuse me for a second. So what I'm going to read is the first chapter of my memoir, in a work in progress. And I do have to make a disclaimer that one name has been changed in here because it does reflect on someone who I can't name. So there. It's from a memoir that I'm working on at Playa. It's called Vita Flats. Chapter 1, Heroin. Vita Flats, Oregon, April 1975. Across Vita Flats, the sun splits the clouds, streaking the weedy baseball field and dilapidated bleachers. Spring rain puddled in the U-shaped road that lined the flats and led to our settlement of 9 rental houses, first built, I'd been told by a local, by a lumber company for their employees in 1940s. Our house sat at the far east end, one half of a duplex hemmed in with a steep hillside to the back, a green double-wide Forest Service office to the east, and a laurel hedge along the Mackenzie River. A rope and wood swing hung from a maple tree in the yard, and beneath the tree a wooden bench. We were far from home, 3,090 miles to be exact. Outside in the grass-patched yard, my 4-year-old son Jason and his 2 friends played with Tonka trucks. Of the few belongings we'd brought with us from New Hampshire, I'd made sure to pack Jason's toys while leaving behind antiques stored in my mother's cellar that I would have to later sell dirt cheap when I knew I'd never go home again. I kept an eye on the boys from my art room window while my wood-burning tool warmed on its metal stand, and I sketched a scene of the Three Sisters mountain peaks on a smooth cedar board with beveled edges. Doug, my ex, had given me one of the 3 tiny bedrooms of this uninsulated house when we moved west and landed in Vida in 1973. He built a work table out of scavenged lumber and said if I put in a full day, turning out small drawings, paintings, and wood burnings, he and I would sell them to tourists. He told me a lot of things back then. Now, however, there was no we. To survive, I'd taken over Doug's caretaking job of the flats so I could keep the free rent and phone. The landlord didn't know, and I didn't tell him since he never came up from town. Along with food stamps, blocks of wick cheese, trips to town to nab boxes of past due date groceries left at the back of the Safeway store for anyone to take, and bulk shopping at the Springfield Creamery, I patched together basic subsistence along with growing a garden, working a weekly job cleaning a widower's house, and making a few dollars from picking blueberries. Doug and I weren't divorced yet, and with him paying no child support, I'd recently swallowed what little pride I had left and applied for welfare. I told myself over and over I had no choice. With a child, I couldn't be gone for weeks planting trees, and I didn't know how to bartend, the only two jobs available on the river. I certainly couldn't move to town as rent would be too high, and I had no skills. In high school, I had been voted most likely to succeed. Could I have fallen any further? Yes, I could. I could take a job at Gentleman's Retreat, a massage parlor in town. Many of you may know that. Or remember the name. That would have done the trick. I could have hung a wood-burned plaque over my desk near the door and read, most likely to succeed, then failed. Maybe that's why my class also voted me class clown. Maybe they smelled my potential downfall all along. At least this far from my hometown, I wouldn't continue to embarrass anyone, especially my mother. I was alone, and as my parents had once said when they discovered me pregnant and living with a Vietnam vet instead of attending the University of New Hampshire, "You've made your bed, now lie in it." In the living room, my record player dropped a second album on the turntable, Pentangle's Cruel Sister. And after I sang the second verse, "If I do not find my love, I'll mourn most constantly," I snorted and said, "Not a happening." I'd mourned too much over the years. I'd cried loudly. I'd cried messily at times. Sometimes I'd wept silently in that old-fashioned way of dealing with fear and knowing I was fucked. What I desperately wanted to do was my art while raising my son and finding friends who understood what it felt like to create a new life, one unlike the old one that didn't crush you beneath perception, expectations, and conditional love. Whether I could survive here on my own was another matter. At least no one here knew of my ruined reputation. I don't think anyone cared. I continued to sketch, outlining mountains in foreground with an HB pencil and then shading areas with a softer 2B pencil. When I finished, I picked up my wood burner, a gift from Santa when I was 14, and I pressed it into the board and disappeared in the burn of heated metal and graphite and cedar, the tool spitting when it hit resin. As I worked, I plunged into a sensation, a bodily flood of feeling that somehow I'd been here before or was experiencing the past. A long ago past I wouldn't be able to recognize until much later, when I read women's pioneering diaries and understood what pioneer women had gone through when dragged here by restless husbands to settle a wild land. As a New Englander, a few days felt familiar. Natives hated us and tried to run us off the road, threw us out of taverns at gunpoint, and wouldn't allow us in their stores. Doug, damaged from a war that had divided a nation, succumbed to the West's unlimited freedom. It was 1975, but it might as well have been the years following the Civil War. Some of my fellow female immigrants had lost their men to the dream of riches on the Alaskan pipeline, or the restlessness that seemed to dog them. We'd been left to fend for ourselves in a hostile environment. Survival meant I measured days by having enough to eat and enduring no sudden appearance from the ex, who could show up uninvited, his gravel-crunching tires tripping the wire to my usual "don't mess with me" body armor, and sending me retreating like rainwater down a drain. No. Not today. I wouldn't let anything ruin today. I had a larder almost filled with food, and I was making art. a righteous day. In the living room, fir chunks popped and crackled in the stove, the pitchy wood scent filling the house. Outside, the boys were marching in a circle around a tree, Preston, the oldest, in the lead. Light reflected off the wet laurel hedges. Puddles mirrored the sky. Everything washed clean. When summer came, we'd be swimming in Gate Creek swimming hole behind the store, and Gavin, the guy I was seeing, a sweet, quiet, disabled Vietnam vet who lived in Blue River, would play on the upriver baseball team against a Vida team. And I'd finally get to meet new people. I didn't love Gavin. I cared for him, but after 3 years with Doug, who had steadily descended into booze, pot, and something else I couldn't identify, I didn't want a relationship. I would have loved romance, but I'd already tried that and almost got myself killed. My breathing turned shallow and jagged, and I had to remind myself that Doug now lived up at Mount Hood, hours away, no longer within easy range of dropping by to check on me. When my hand steadied again, I returned to the mountain scene, tracing the penciled lines of the mountains and horizon of fir trees with the hot tip of the burner. Using the bevel edge, I bore down to create various shades of burn for depth. The Three Sisters range took shape, and the comforting scent of cedar filled the room. Every so often, when I couldn't hear the boys outside, I'd glance up to check on them. The phone rang, and I jumped before I remembered it was more likely to be the widower I cleaned house for, or a renter with a leaky pipe or a broken step. My ex had been good at fixing things, and I'd learned to assess basic repairs and who to call to repair them. When I called the landlord for permission to have something done, so far he hadn't asked about Doug. I set the tool on its stand, wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, walked into the living room, and picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, trying to sound normal, strong. "Hi, Val, it's Carl." Relieved, I lit a cigarette. Carl was one of the guys from town who fixed things on the flats. I figured he was calling about an upcoming repair on house number 1. I walked to the window and looked out over the field and the baseball diamond. "Hey, Carl, what's happening?" "I need to tell you something." "Oh, no. Had he talked to the landlord and I was out of a job?" "This is between you and me." His voice sounded funny, tight, not natural. I leaned forward, flicked an ash in the standing amber ashtray, and said, "Sure, no problem." He hesitated. "If you know anyone upriver who's doing heroin, tell them there's going to be a big bust soon." I took a drag and tried to get my head around what he'd just said. Heroin? A heroin bust? Really? When he said anyone upriver, did he mean people up in Blue River and Mackenzie Bridge, or people here in Vida too? "Okay," I finally said. "If I hear of anyone doing it, I'll tell them." Oh God, that was stupid. Why hadn't I told him I don't know anyone who does heroin? All I'd ever done was smoke pot. Same with my friends, or so I assumed. "Just wanted you to know," Carl said. I have no idea what I said. I probably thanked him. God knows I was still polite and thankful. After he hung up, I turned from the window, the idea of heroin making the light too bright and the house too quiet. I flipped through my albums and slipped "It's a Beautiful Day" onto the turntable. Had that call just happened? Just let it go, I told myself. But I couldn't. My crazy need to analyze everything made the questions pile up. How did Carl, a straight Eugene business owner, know about a bust? Why tell me? Did he think I did heroin? And who was doing heroin up here? I didn't even know what doing heroin looked like. Sure, Janis Joplin had died from an overdose, but she'd been a rock star. When I graduated from high school in 1969, I knew no one who smoked pot. The people I'd met so far on the river said little about their past unless it was colorful and innocent, like Kendra, a new friend who had worked at San Francisco's Hungry Eye. None of the people I'd met so far knew that in 1969, a year of student protests against the war, the Manson murders, the Weathermen, and Woodstock, I was a high school senior wearing a baby blue sweater set my mother bought for me, the skirt ending exactly 2 inches above my knees, regulation length, and I worked part-time as a switchboard operator for the New England Tell-and-Tell. While at the University of New Hampshire, I met Doug, and knowing nothing about birth control, became pregnant and dropped out. Doug smoked pot, something he fell into while in NAM, but I couldn't even smoke cigarettes when I was pregnant. For our wedding in December '69, Doug and I dressed Carnaby Street mod, not Haight-Ashbury. To me, it was fashion, not revolution. We began our life together with jobs during the week and family or friends on weekends. Until I came to Oregon, I never even thought of myself as a hippie, even though I dressed in cut-off denims and halter tops and India print dresses. I just never thought about who I was. I just was. After I finished my cigarette, I poured boiling water from the kettle heating on the airtight stove onto a tea bag. Damn it. I told Carl I would warn people about the bust, but who? I paced. Maybe Kendra would know what to do. She was 7 years older and hip. After straightening the tapestry cloth covering the couch, I watered the spider plant and fed wood into the airtight while waiting for my tea to brew. I straightened the lace curtains I made from a garage sale tablecloths. I went to the bathroom. I checked the boys. Oh, to be that innocent again. Now I was angry. Why hadn't I told Carl I knew nothing about heroin? When had I become such a chicken shit that I couldn't stand up for myself? I used to speak my mind even when it got me in trouble. The boys in high school wouldn't date me because I didn't play coy, and as one said, I was too mouthy. Before Doug, I had opinions and voiced them. Maybe I should start voicing them again. But violence had scared my mouth shut. Excuse me. The tea mug warmed my cold hands as I stood at the corner kitchen window. Across the field, Michael, who lived in our smallest house and would become a good friend, was headed to the store. John, a sweet, talented musician from Boston, lived next to him and had taken me partway up the old Mackenzie Pass road to a mystical constellation of fluorescent pools called the Shags. That day he photographed my arms covered with butterflies. Not to either of them doing heroin. Still, now that I had the information, I felt responsible, but who to tell? My suspicions ran to the uprivers. I met upriver people on Friday or Saturday nights while dancing to live music at the Cougar Room or the Blue River Tavern. When Doug had first gone off with another woman, I had told my woes to a sympathetic and charming upriver named Slim. He was cute, blonde, and had a dimple, plus he hadn't fought in the war. He lived with Tim and Mother Mo at what would become the infamous hole in the wall, where he took me to his room and we fell into bed. Other uprivers, Charlie, Ruby, Mike, Gino, Smokey, all had their stories, but they all seemed like typical hippies trying to escape the life they'd left to make a new one. Rumors, however, made me afraid to spend much time up there. One upriver had killed a man in LA. 2 Vietnam vets regularly dressed in fatigues and carried out night patrols. Barroom brawls broke out at the Cougar Room on a regular basis because there was no law upriver. If a cop was called, it took over an hour for them to show, so no one called. The second night Gavin stayed at my house, we lay in bed and he told me the uprivers called Vida the DMZ. Why, I asked? Because we're boring? He said, 'cause Vida is peaceful and you gals don't let any shit go down. But I noticed after a few days he'd be itchy to head back upriver. Yep, we were boring. Or, even though Vida had a few wackos, like Logger John, who resembled Charles Manson and was rumored to be either CIA or a member of the Weathermen, an organization that carried out bombings, jailbreaks, and riots, the rest of the guys in Vida seemed pretty mellow. Most of the women invited were single moms too busy surviving, so I counted them out. I looked at the clock, late afternoon, the boys would be hungry. When I checked on the boys, Jamie, Preston's younger brother, was crying. The boys had turned sticks into jousting rods. Homemade chocolate chip cookies were in order. The boys sat on the bench as I checked Jamie to see if he was all right. Then I gave each boy 2 cookies and went inside to get them milk. Cookies and milk. At least I understood that. A gunshot whipped me around. No, not a gunshot. A log truck coming down Gate Creek Road had backfired. Its Jake brakes whined and ground as the rig came to a stop at the entry to the Mackenzie Highway. I let go a held breath. After giving the boys their milk, I went back to my art table and swore I'd never be derailed from my art again. I needed to get my courage back, not to be afraid, find a way to live so I could do my art and raise my son. But my hands still shook. Heroin. What the hell would I do with that? A spring burst of rain forced the boys inside. I rushed outside, picked up the empty glasses and cookie plate and took them to the kitchen sink. When the rain subsided, I walked the boys home. As we headed down the lane to Linda's house, the 3rd house on the west side, I took in the wild beauty of this place and I knew I had to make this my home. I could never go back to New Hampshire, not after what happened on our recent Christmas trip. I would have to live off the land and my wits, which wouldn't be easy. I needed friends and couldn't afford to alienate anyone, even the river rats who might be doing heroin. Couldn't they be doing heroin on weekends, like drinking, recreationally? Did they have to be addicts? I couldn't send out a warning. People would see me as the messenger, and I knew what happened to messengers. But I did have my own rules. Bottom line, I'd do nothing to put my son in harm's way. What if I were innocently grabbed up in a heroin bust while warning people about a heroin bust? That's when I decided to say nothing. I had enough to worry about. What good would it do to get involved? None. As far as I was concerned, that phone call never happened. I didn't know anyone who did heroin. It might as well have been a wrong number. But I couldn't blow it off with, "This just doesn't concern me." I hated that kind of thinking. Always had. Yet, if people were doing heroin, wouldn't it be better if the bus went down before someone OD'd? Heroin was a form of violence you did to yourself. If you were dealing the drug, you caused violence. Just knowing about it felt dangerous. Maybe the bust would save a few lives. Let the bust happen. I don't remember what I did after taking the boys home. Trauma always caused memory lapses for me. Like the lapses I'd had after I'd been beaten, or the lost summer after my best friend Diane had been electrocuted in a car accident, or the blank months with shards of memories after Dr. Robinson called to tell me Dad had shot himself. I can only guess that Jason and I probably did what we usually did. He'd be dirty from playing outside, so I'd bathe him in the kitchen sink because he hated the shower. We probably ate top ramen or mac and cheese with homemade bread. Before he went to bed, we usually snuggled on the couch. I might have read him his favorite bedtime story, Serendipity, about a blue-watered dragon, his fellow sea creatures, and an ocean that was quickly becoming polluted. Danger everywhere. When I tucked him into bed, I always inhaled the smell of him, the sweetness. I'd smooch his cheek as he wrapped his skinny little arms around my neck and be reassured that I could go on. I could survive. I would do anything to keep my son safe. After I kissed him goodnight and maybe sang him a lullaby, I would have done the dishes or not, but definitely would have fed the stove again. I probably changed into my blue flannel nightie, wrapped myself in a blanket and curled up on the couch with a book. Maybe 1,000 Years of Solitude. But I doubt if I could have concentrated that night. I probably put the book down and listened to the croaking of tree frogs or a Joni Mitchell album. If I drew the blanket up closer to my chin, I would smell Heidi, our beagle, and I would miss her as Doug had taken her with him. I often turned out the light and sat in the dark. Just sat until I was so tired I didn't fear night sounds, sounds that didn't belong in the DMZ. Even now, I choke back something heavy and wrenching. I can imagine my 24-year-old self, scared, wanting desperately to get past whatever this heroin thing was, past April and the hot, crazy summer. I can see her as maple leaves fall, as life calms down, apples ripening on the trees, canned vegetables going into the cupboard, and the air clean, fresh, and brisk. Young, lonely, and thrown into a wild world that challenged everything she knew, she sits in the dark, waiting for her eyes to adjust, waiting for a life she cannot yet imagine or see. Thank you.